Good morning, Albuquerque, and thank you for joining Mayor Tim Keller's Coronavirus Update Telephone Town Hall. This is our fourth telephone town hall in the last month as we work to keep everyone updated here in Albuquerque. For those of you who are wondering if you are connected, you are. Right now, you are in what is called listen-only mode, which means that you can hear me, but I cannot hear you. Today's town hall will focus on reopening Albuquerque. In just a moment, we will introduce Mayor Keller and other city leaders, and then we will open it up for questions. But first, let me go over a few housekeeping items. If you would like to ask a question, you can press *3 on your phone, and you will be put into line to speak with one of our staff members. Again, to ask a question, press *3 on your phone, and you'll be put into line to speak with one of our staff members. They will hop on, take down your name and your question, and then you will return to the town hall. Then, if you hear your name and question, you will be live to the entire conference and can ask your question directly to Mayor Keller and city officials. We'll do our best to get to as many questions as possible, so please press *3 now if you'd like to ask a question. Again, press *3 right now to get into line to ask a question. Along with Mayor Keller, we also have a number of city leaders joining us today who can speak to some of the specific questions folks in Albuquerque have been asking. We have Lawrence Real, our Chief Operation Officer for the city, Cynthia Jaramillo, our Director of Economic Development, Brennan Williams, our Director of the Planning Department, Ryan Mast, our Director of the Environmental Health Department, Harold Medina, Deputy Chief of APD, and Kristen Chavez-Smith, our Family and Community Services Division Manager, also part of our Youth Connect program. Now, I would like to turn the conversation over to Mayor Keller for some initial remarks before we jump into questions. Mayor, go right ahead.
Well, thanks so much, Alan, and hello, Albuquerque. I want to thank everyone for joining us for another one of our telephone town halls. We've been hosting a few of these to answer your questions directly, and appreciate everyone who's participated. And for us, it's a great way to connect on as much as we can on a one-on-one basis. So I'm going to share some initial thoughts, and then we'll try and save time for as many questions as we can. And so today, we're really focusing on our plans on how we're going to be able to open up the city and also be responsible with respect to life-saving measures that we need to put in place. Now, COVID-19 has really hit our economy hard. We know this. And when we talk about the economy, we're talking about people's families, their businesses, everything in so many ways that makes Albuquerque special is tied to, us being open in one way or another. And we also know that people in our city and actually across the country are out of work right now, and it's taking a toll on their own personal family life as well. So for us at the city, we're working hard to provide some safety nets for the most vulnerable. That's what we've been doing so far, and that's what we are going to continue to do as we think about opening up. So this is about helping people who are struggling to pay their bills with respect to rental assistance and others. It's about the food boxes and the meal delivery programs that we're doing. But we know that we've got to get the economy back up and running. That is key to turning things around. Now, last week, we announced that we've begun crafting some data-driven plans so that businesses can reopen and stay open, and that's the key. We want to try and do this in the right way and in a staggered way so that we don't have to close again. That would be extremely terrible for the economy. So the key is to reopen in a way that keeps our healthcare system at adequate capacity, because we know there's going to be relapses. We know there's going to be, hot spots and different sort of flare-ups of the virus around central New Mexico. And as long as our healthcare system can sort of handle those, we're in good shape. But that's why we've got to take this slow. And so we're working closely with the state, with public health officials, and also our local business community and even regional mayors. We're all talking now almost on a daily basis about how we're going to be able to do this. And as we continue down this road, we are trying to prop up the local economy as much as we can. And so as a reminder, we were able to provide 140 micro businesses with $5,000 grants. And that program was extremely popular. We had 1,400 companies apply for it in just 3 days. and unfortunately we could only help 140, but at least we were able to help those. We have tried to keep our construction industry going. So you might notice Rio Grande's getting repaved. 4th Street's going to get repaved next week. We're also going to finish up on Manal. We're trying to do that while there's lighter traffic, but also those companies are all volunteering. I mean, it's their choice, and they are all very much wanting to work and get that paycheck for their family. So we've in total pushed up about $70 million in construction projects. So what you're going to see in May is a new community center start up in the Southeast Heights, roughly around the Singh neighborhood. There's going to be another new community center out on the west side in the Westgate neighborhood, and there's going to be a spectacular new library, a real showcase for our city at the old Caravan East lot, which is in roughly central in Wyoming. All of these we're hoping will start in May and June. And we also got $1 million from City Council to help prop up nonprofits who are helping either with the homeless or helping our first responders or helping our healthcare workers or those most in need, including our immigrant families. So those funds are all being utilized as best as we can to try and essentially pave the road towards recovery. Now, you can learn more about all these city efforts about how to provide relief and essential services by going to our website, cabq.gov. We also continue to coordinate Central New Mexico-wide volunteer efforts as well as donation efforts. And so all that information is available and coordinated through City of Albuquerque. So we know we've seen from past town halls that there's a lot of questions people want to answer. So I want to, actually maybe kind of cut it short and let's really dive into some of those good questions everyone has. So back to you, Alan.
Great. Thank you very much, Mayor. And thank you again to everyone who's participating with us in today's town hall. If you're just joining us and you'd like to ask Mayor Keller a question, please press *3 on your phone. You'll be placed into line to speak with one of our staff members who will take your question and then return you to the town hall. Again, to ask a question, please press *3. So, Mayor, right away we're seeing a number of residents who have the same kinds of questions, knowing that the state and local orders will start expiring in the coming weeks. Where is the city at overall in terms of getting ready to reopen?
Well, that's a fundamental question, something certainly on everyone's mind. And, as badly as we just want to pick a date and say, hey, we're opening, for us right now, it's clear the virus still has to pick that specific date, not us. And there's some important statistical and data reasons why, which I'll just touch on. But I want to remind everyone that, the price of opening up too soon is really paid in lives lost and economic collapse longer and harsher than we already have. So it's very important, again, that we try and open and stay open so that we don't go through this kind of freeze tag situation like my kids like to play right now all over the place in the house. That we got to keep things operating as best we can. So to do that, we want to do it in the right way. So here's what we're looking at. The timing for reopening is really driven by, in summary, about 4 criteria. And, first is we've got to get past the peak in new cases and fatalities. And we think we're close on that. And this is, any time in the next 10 days, I think we're going to be past that. That's good news. The second criteria is the medical system ready? Do we have enough beds and personnel and ICUs and ventilators? And actually, we're looking good on that. New Mexico has done such a good job of flattening the curve, and Bernalillo County, that we feel like we're in good shape there. And it's the same with testing capacity. I think we're also in good shape there, again, because we have invested in flattening the curve. So these are areas where we're very optimistic. And the last component is really about tracking, contact tracing, as it's known, and having the capacity to do that, and also quarantine capacity. So setting up the rubric to understand what happens if you're at a shopping mall or you're in a big office building and there are some positive cases, and how we make sure that everyone is contacted and then people self-quarantine until they can get tested. That process is what we're in the middle of now with the state. So as you can see, our indicators are looking very positive. We're just not quite ready yet. And so we know that jumping the gun for this would be just a little bit too dangerous, but we're getting there. And I think let me also mention that, we're working with the business community to understand a staggered opening. And if there's more questions, we can talk about that. But we want to turn the faucet on slowly, basically so that we can monitor if there's a jump in cases. And if there's not, you open more. If there is, maybe you pause for a little bit longer. So that's how we're approaching reopening.
Great. Thank you very much, Mayor. And for those who are just joining us, please remember that you can press *3 on your phone to ask Mayor Keller and city officials your question. *3, and you'll be connected with our staff to ask your question. We're going to go to our first live question now, and we've got a question from Candace, and Candace has a question about essential versus non-essential businesses and social distancing. Candace, go right ahead. You're live on the line.
So my question is how are we going to start opening the businesses, whether they're essential or non-essential, and if we could just use the social distancing rules when we open them, maybe open them sooner, and then just let the people that have low immune systems or the older, they can stay quarantined longer. But I just don't understand why healthy people have to continue to be quarantined or, the stay-at-home order. So can you answer my question as to whether we can just work on keeping the elder population and the low immune home?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Candace. That is an excellent point, and this is something now we're in discussions with the state on. So I think this is a good opportunity. Let me mention there's 5 tenets that we're looking at for reopening. And the first one is that we believe that we should have, that we're all essential, essentially. And so I believe that we want as few sectors or population groups as closed as possible. Now, we have to be really careful how we think through things like tattoo parlors, barber shops, these kinds of areas where people are in close proximity. But we're learning very fast and watching very closely what's happening in Georgia and Colorado right now. And so we'll have our own New Mexico flavor of this. But the answer is, at least from my perspective, I want to really break down this distinction between who's essential and who's not. And instead, use what is our second tenet, which is some new norms for when we reopen, which is about the percentage of occupancy so that we can maintain distancing. We might have some recommendations around masks. We might require some screening protocol for large facilities and so forth, and also some quarantine protocols for if there's an outbreak. And so setting up those new norms is something that we're working on this week. And also another, one of our tenets again is, let's start slow, like week by week, and then see how it goes. And then we might be able to increase those occupancy levels and so forth. And the other aspect, too, is a tenant is just being ready for relapse. So, like what we had at La Vidiana with the nursing homes and so forth. Now I think we want to have a very clear protocol what to do. And we saw this at the courts. So there were some positive cases in our court buildings. And basically, look, they closed for a whole day. It was like a day-long fire drill. But they used that for 2 reasons. One was to sanitize and clean everything. The other one was to make sure that they could trace everyone who'd been exposed to the person who tested positive and contact them and tell them to stay home the next day. So those are the kinds of things we might see as we reopen. But to your point, I'm very much in favor of having those, regulations in place so that we can all open. Again, there's probably always going to be some exceptions. And the last tenet is really just a reminder that in Albuquerque, we're regionally unique. So in some ways, we might be able to open some things faster, like even city services. Our city government is very robust and able right now compared to a lot of other city governments. So we might be able to do some things like our kids programs. We're planning on having a full summer of kids programs. They are probably going to be different in terms of how they're operated, but we think we're going to be able to do that. And a lot of other cities, unfortunately aren't going to be able to do that. So in some ways, we can move faster. But in other ways, we also might have to move slower because we know that everyone in Grants and Gallup and for really about a 400 square mile radius, they all come to Albuquerque for healthcare and for our airports and for our shopping and for everything else. So, we also might have to have some areas that have stricter regulations. So those are kind of the 5 things that we're looking at as we open up, and one is very much your point.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you again to everyone who's joining us for today's town hall. If you'd like to ask a question, please press *3 on your phone to be connected with our staff. Again, *3 to ask a question. We've got our next question is going to come from Fred, and Fred's got a question that dovetails with the summer programs that Mayor was just talking about for Parks and Rec. Fred, go right ahead. You're on the line.
Hi, Mayor. I was kind of curious about Park and Recreations, the activities that go on. Are you going to cancel like the softball league, senior league, and the other leagues that are planned?
Thanks, Brett.
Thank you,
Appreciate
Fred.
it. Yeah, and this is an area, and again, where everything is a little real time, meaning that I will tell you my intent and our administration's intent right now, and if all goes well, we're going to deliver on that. But obviously, if there are concerns, it might change in a couple of weeks. So our plan is roughly after Memorial Day, we are going to begin allowing all of these things, whether it's Little League or softball, again, our different city programs. And so we call it the Youth Connect program, which indirectly includes our adult programs as well through Parks and Rec. Now, we're going to do this with a new set of rules. So as I mentioned, we're going to try and figure out what the game plan is, if you will, in terms of the rules of the game, whether it's proximity or number of games or how we're thinking about the stands and tailgating and all these kinds of details. This is what we're working on right now. But our plan in Albuquerque is to really, get folks outside and recreating in a way that's also safe. And so want to make sure that that's our intent. And again, we've got at least several weeks to put that together. I do want to create some space now because there's a woman who's in charge of a lot of that who's on the phone. And so want to tee up Kristen Chavez-Smith to kind of add in and outline how we're going about thinking about all these different programs the city runs, which, by the way, for listeners, we estimate almost 100,000 Burqueños are involved in city programs during the summer. It's a fourth of the city. And if you want to throw in Freedom Fourth and some others, you get to almost 3/4 of the city that's engaged one way or another. So this impacts a lot of us, which is why we're being thoughtful about it. And again, we also might stagger how we're doing this. But Kristen, if you want to add in some other thoughts, that'd be great.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Kristen Chavez-Smith with the Department of Family and Community Services. And just like Mayor Keller said, what we're planning across departments for youth programs and recreation in general is really to operate at the greatest capacity that we can while taking into account the most current recommendations for social distancing, hygiene, cleaning, all of those things, so that we're making sure to keep the kids' safety, in mind. Our staff safety, for sure, is a huge concern of ours. The city is going to try to operate at the largest capacity that we can, cross-departmentally, for youth programs and recreation programs in general this summer, but at the same time while keeping in consideration all of the current recommendations from the governor's office and health recommendations for social distancing, hygiene like washing hands, and cleaning. So we will be releasing more information in the coming weeks, specific information on registrations, what numbers might look like, and how we could phase it in over the summer. So we may start small but be able to grow substantially as the summer progresses. So we have a lot of exciting things coming up for families and kids in particular that we're excited to offer.
Great. Thank you very much, Kristen. Again, if you're just joining us, thank you for your patience after we experienced technical difficulties. If you had a question for the mayor, please press *3 to jump in the queue, and you'll be connected with our staff to ask that question. Again, *3 to ask your question of Mayor Keller and city officials. Now, Mayor, before we got cut off, we had a few questions in the queue about public safety in the Albuquerque Police Department. Specifically, how are we protecting officers and how are we protecting local businesses as there have been concerns about break-ins and that kind of thing?
Sure. Well, this one I know is very important, especially because we're seeing while we're seeing a decrease in residential burglary, we're seeing an increase in commercial burglary because, it makes sense. Everyone's staying at home, and of course, so many of these businesses are empty. So what I'm going to do, we are fortunate to be joined by our Deputy Chief, Harold Medina, who's in charge of all our field operations. And so why don't we start with some comments from him. DC?
Hello, Albuquerque. This is Deputy Chief Medina, and those are two great questions. And the first question on how we're protecting our officers, there's a variety of ways in how we're trying to accomplish this. The very first thing we did to help accomplish protecting our officers and their families back at home, because we know whatever our officers encounter at work, obviously they're going to go home and potentially expose their family to it. So the first thing we did was we limited the amount of contact with the community by allowing our officers to take phone calls over the telephone when appropriate, and also referring more calls to the telephone report unit. Officers have been very pleased with this. They are reporting back that they like the process and that a lot of times their calls are not holding as they used to in the past because, quite frankly, by the time it takes them to drive to some calls, they've been able to clear them over the phone. So that's definitely one of the lessons learned that we're going to look at implementing for the future. The second way we really work to protect them is ensuring that they have the proper gear and that it's always available and that they've gotten the latest updates and information when possible on current trends. And then the third way is we actually put a team together and we have a specific lieutenant who's designated kind of the gatekeeper as to possible exposures. And what we've done is we try to get our officers paired up so they take calls with the same person during the week, because of the lessons learned from other agencies back east early on is it wasn't necessarily the exposure of the officers catching COVID that was affecting their ability to provide services. It was the amount of officers that were being quarantined while they figured out if they had gotten COVID-19 or not. So what we've been able to do is a lot of times this one lieutenant who filters all the incoming information and all the possible exposures is able to put people in a quarantine status till we get that person cleared to come back into work. And we see that it's a pair and we don't have the cross-contamination across a whole watch or even worse, a whole area command. So there's a lot of things that we're doing to make sure our officers are safe, and those are just some of the steps. The second question is in terms of what are we doing to protect businesses, and I think this goes back to our commercial burglaries. And a few weeks ago, we did see that we had a trend that was showing there was an increase in commercial burglaries. About 2 weeks ago, I asked our real-time crime center director, commander, to go ahead and get a hold of the crime lab and to put to the forefront all fingerprint cases that were involving commercial burglaries at this time, with the hope to ensure that we get the current suspects and people who are actively committing burglaries identified and taken into custody. We also identified several individuals who had felony warrants for commercial burglaries that we felt would be appropriate for us to focus on. And we currently have our investigative bureau focusing on these areas and these individuals. So we will remain vigilant and proactive in trying to identify these individuals and take them as quickly as possible into custody. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Deputy Chief Medina. And thank you all for rejoining us on today's town hall focused on reopening Albuquerque. We apologize for the technical difficulties we experienced earlier, and we'll be going about 15 minutes longer today to make up for the time we lost. So we're going to try and go till about 12:45 here in Albuquerque. We're going to go back to our live questions now. And our next question comes from William. And William's got a question about food shortages. William, go right ahead. You're on the line.
Hello. Thank you for taking my call. My question and concern is related to food security and resilience for Albuquerque and the state of New Mexico. We are hearing reports from the UN and elsewhere that there are bound to be food shortages in the coming months and years because of this crisis. I think Albuquerque can and should do something to increase our food security and resiliency, not just for the city of Albuquerque, but for the state. One of the ways we can do that, in my opinion, is to do something like open up more open space for agriculture use. And I know that that's already a thing, but I think that's one direction we can go. Additionally, there are plots of land that are unused throughout Albuquerque that we should be able to do something like either plant on or establish greenhouses on. And inside greenhouses, it increases the amount of time during the year we would be able to grow agriculture. There are also other ways of growing inside a greenhouse that would increase that window dramatically. Aquaponics agriculture inside of a greenhouse would enable us to grow food 365 days a year. Additionally, aquaponics uses anywhere from 50 to 90% less water, and aquaponics increases the yield during a given time period anywhere from 2 to 5 times. Personally,
oh, I think we lost you, but go ahead, Mayor.
Sure, William, really appreciate that, and the also your knowledge of different types of agriculture. So a couple of things here for this. One, in terms of general food supply, we do have our emergency management center looking at those issues, and what we're seeing, at least, no one knows down the road, and I have read a little bit about how there could be some real long-term issues, but at least for Albuquerque, at least in the short term, we feel the food supply is adequate. We might not be able to get, from time to time, certain types of meats and things like this because of the different closures, but in general, food supply seems to be okay for the near future. Now, we are trying to do some things, like you mentioned, actually, with respect to localizing to be more resilient. And so part of that is propping up our local farming. So the local farming that's already happening. I think the biggest thing we can do to really honor what you're talking about is to buy local. So you can do that at our local grocery stores, but we opened up the Farm to Car program, which actually starts this Sunday at the rail yards. And if folks, you can hop on the internet and order your local agricultural products through there and then go pick it up at the rail yards. And it's the same with the Downtown Growers Market. That's a Saturday pickup. And again, check out their website. So we listen to the local community-supported agriculture groups to really support that. There's also a number of ways that you can get food boxes that are local. You can order local produce food boxes. And so there's a number of entities that are involved in that. And you can check with the Agricultura Network to get connected to those different farms. So also your idea about local growing, though, is really interesting. We are in the process of opening up, looking at Candelaria Farm and Heritage Farm for more local agriculture. So I think this is a good reason to kind of accelerate that process. And I think in the short term, if there is a spot of open space that someone wants to use productively, we're always open to that. So I think, lots of times people want to see someone else do it, and that would be great. But if somebody actually is interested in using it, we'd have that discussion right now, actually. So I think that touches on most of your questions there.
Great, thank you, Mayor. Again, please press *3 to ask Mayor Keller a question and other city leaders, *3, and you'll be connected with our staff. And thank you again for those who are rejoining after we experienced some technical difficulties. As I mentioned a moment ago, we're going to go a little bit longer, about 15 minutes longer today to 12:45 to try and make up for that. So our next question comes from Arthur. And Arthur's got a question about sort of the calls to open up the city and PPE. Arthur, go right ahead.
Good afternoon, Mayor Keller. I applaud your work in keeping Albuquerque and all of Bernalillo County safe. While I believe that PPE should go first to the medical and then first responders, if you look at countries like New Zealand and Australia, the way that they've kept their incidence of COVID very small is that all citizens had available to them masks, gloves, sanitizing wipes, and hand sanitizer. I can't find those in Albuquerque stores. So until those are readily available to all citizens, I think we should stay distant and stay closed down. Let's go about it safely. I always wear my seatbelt in my car.
Oh, thanks,
Thank you.
Arthur. Oh, go ahead.
Go right ahead, Mayor.
Yeah, Arthur, thank you for that. We might have just lost the end of that, but appreciate you always wearing your seatbelt in the car. It's a good analogy. And also just the last two callers have really spoken to resilience, and hopefully we showed a little bit by getting this call back up and running, so that's good. But, this is one where, okay, the Emergency Operations Center has been categorizing and allocating the, medical grade PPE. So I think really what is a helpful distinction here to make is that right now we believe our first responders and our healthcare workers have, just enough medical grade PPE. That's the current sort of forecast levels. And again, that's a good thing, but obviously if things get worse, it could be a challenge. So, that was how we prioritized that. I think, though, what Arthur, you're really also highlighting, which is good, is just this notion of face masks and wearing gloves. And I know there is, in many ways, shortages, at least if you want to kind of go get the off-the-box Walgreens type. But there are a lot of Facebook groups making masks, selling masks. There's a lot of different, actually, as soon as our sewing shops open, they're almost all doing this now. And so I think there's going to be lots of different ways people can get a cheap, double covering, appropriate materialed face covering. And in the meantime, too, it's okay just to use a good scarf. So anyway, all of that's helpful. And what we're going to do is, as we go towards reopening, we are probably going to either have strong recommendations around this, to your point, and then for businesses, it might even be required. So that's actually exactly what we're looking at now. And we do have our Director of Environmental Health, who really is the key recommender on this. Ryan Mast, if you want to add anything else on how we're looking at that, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Arthur, for that great question. I think that the key aspect of what we're looking at when we think about some of the reopening procedures on this is that we're not going to be going back straight to normal. There's going to be a lot of different modifications that we're going to want to look at. And this is as a result of the continued risk that the virus poses in the community, as well as Arthur pointed out, some of the shortages in some of the protective equipment that would be available. And, that protective equipment really is critical for folks who are working in high-risk environments. And so a lot of our direction and our directives that are coming, that we'll be pushing out, are related to risk factors. And so, in addition to just personal protective equipment, there's other ways that businesses have already been thinking about this process to reduce that risk. And that's in creating physical barriers, as you've seen in many of the big box stores and even some of the smaller grocery stores at the cash registers, as well as just thinking about how you do business. And I think one important factor now that we need to think about moving forward is that, we've created a lot of alternatives and new methods to do business throughout this. Many of those should continue. That includes doing telework, doing remote meetings, limiting the time that you're spending with folks who may be high risk. And we're going to be also really focusing in on those areas and those businesses and locations that have vulnerable populations. That includes our seniors and folks with underlying health conditions, because those are still going to remain at high risk until there is treatment for this virus as well as a vaccine. And so we're going to be working really closely with our partners at the Department of Health, at the state level, as well as the New Mexico Environmental Department, following guidance from the FDA, from the CDC, and building that into our recommendations moving forward, so that we're cautious about the way that we reopen, so that we're keeping the public safe.
Thank you very much, Director. And again, if you're just joining us, thank you for your patience, and *3 on your phone to ask a question of Mayor Keller. We're going to try to get to as many questions as we can today. *3 to ask a question. Our next question comes from Rebecca, and Rebecca's got a question about reopening the city. Will there be phases, and what kinds of precautions? Rebecca, go right ahead.
Yes. So question is, how do you see opening up the city? Is it going to be in phases? And if so, what businesses would be open first? And with the opening of businesses, should that take place, what precautions or orders would be put in place in order to lessen the relapse and spread of the virus?
Thanks so much, Rebecca. And I think for us, what we're looking at is we are looking at opening in phases. And so we want to make that phasing really based on the social distancing and health norms. So we're hoping, as I mentioned, and I know some people might not have heard the beginning of the call, but we want to basically try and have all businesses open. There might be some minor exceptions, but how they open is really important. So we're looking at percentages of occupancy, restricting that. We're looking at various regulations around face coverings, also perhaps screening coming into businesses, especially for like call centers and things of this nature. We also want to make sure that we have quarantine protocols set up. So the question is, what happens if somebody does test positive? And then we also need people to follow this, test and contact trace protocol. And so these are the things we're outlining now. And for us too, we know that even for city facilities like golf courses, we want to open them up, but it's going to be very different. Everything's going to be different. There's going to be social distancing rules. It'll be a lot like our grocery stores now. And so that's how we're looking at it. And I think the method is really open up a little bit and then measure. So do something for a week. Then let's see how many new cases we get, what capacities in our medical system, how we handled quarantine issues, and then if that all went well, we might be able to open up more and so forth. So it's that kind of staged approach. Now, there are some other examples that are things like the shopping malls and so forth. So we might open up retail, but we might not totally open up Coronado Mall, because of, again, the kind of the mass gathering issue there. So those are all sort of flavors of ice cream, if you will, that we're looking at, how we're going to make all those available. But that's what May is going to be all about. It's going to be a bit of a roller coaster, and it's going to have lots of experimenting, but it's also going to be data-driven, and it's going to be methodical, and we'll be able to keep people safe that way.
Great. Thank you, Mayor. Again, *3 to ask Mayor Keller a question, *3, and you'll be connected with our staff. Our next question comes from Laurel, and Laurel has a question about applying for business loans. Laurel, go right ahead.
Yes, Mayor. Can you hear me?
Yes. Go ahead, Laurel.
Yes, I understand the small businesses applied for loans and only 140 were accepted. What about the other businesses that applied? If money comes available again, are their applications still there, or are they going to have to reapply?
That's a great question, Laurel, and let me give an overview, and then I think Cynthia Jaramillo is on the line, who's our Director of Economic Development, who can answer your specific one. So I was referring to the City Micro Business Grant Program, and I believe we might have gotten a little bit more funding for that. We're also raising money for that for donations. So the One Albuquerque Fund is now given $100,000 in total to homeless vouchers, hotel vouchers, and to this fund. So I know they were able to step up with some additional funding. But as we get more funding, we're going to continue to fund this micro business grant program. So the other flavors are, of course, the federal loan programs that are going through our banks and credit unions, and then I know the state has loan programs as well. So all of that is available on our website, and you can sort of see how to get it. And the new round of federal funding should open up some more of those federal loan programs. But going back specifically to our city level, and again, our city programs are grant funding. Again, they're trying to fill a gap needed just grant money as opposed to loans. And so, Cynthia, why don't you go a little bit further into what the city's doing?
Sure. Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Laurel, for that question. You are correct. An additional $50,000 has been allocated to the Micro Business Relief Program. That is the grant program that the mayor just referred to. The funding came from the One Albuquerque Fund, and we will be able to assist 10 more Albuquerque micro businesses. And I want you to know that this funding will go to those who have already applied to the Micro Business Relief Program. No new applications are being accepted at this time. we will pull from those that have already applied, Laurel. And as Mayor mentioned, we will continue to seek and fundraise for the Micro Business Relief Grant Program. I hope that answers your question.
Great. Thank you, Director. Again, *3 to ask Mayor Keller a question. You'll be connected with our staff. *3 on your phone to be connected to ask your question. Next, Mayor, we're going to go to, there's a few questions in the queue here about construction. Construction in Albuquerque has been ongoing over the past few weeks, and wanted to know how that's going and what does the future look like for that?
Sure. So this question, I think we had a couple of callers ask about it. So what I'm going to tee up is, or who I'm going to tee up is Brennan Williams, our Director of Planning, to speak to this. But just at a high level, again, we tried to push about $70 million of construction projects up to the next 3 months. And also, actually, Lawrence Rael, our COO, might want to chime in on this too. So they can kind of walk through those projects. So on the one hand, we've got our planning department open for inspections and permitting. And on the other hand, too, we are trying to accelerate a lot of these construction projects. And I want to remind folks that, you know, that keeps the working families getting a paycheck. And again, it's all if they so choose. And then it also, there's a lot of other professions that are associated with this, whether it's material supplies or even the architects and so forth involved in this. So again, just want to highlight, it's when you see that construction crew out there, there's a lot of jobs behind it as well. So Brennan, why don't you start, and then Lawrence, you can chime in after that.
Very good. Thank you, Mayor. Hello, everybody. My name is Brennan Williams. I serve as the planning director, and the mayor is absolutely correct. We understand that commercial and residential construction projects are considered essential businesses, and therefore the city of Albuquerque permitting and inspection services continue. From a permitting standpoint, we're happy to see that we're seeing consistent numbers in the amount of applications and plan review submittals that are being presented to the city. We do have a few folks that still report to the office in order to perform these plan review processes. So we continue to do that. We continue to issue permits, construction permits, as it relates to that plan review. And then, of course, we have folks available to answer phone calls or emails and provide any assistance that a permit holder or a prospective applicant might have as it relates to our process. Additionally, we continue to perform the associated inspections that go along with those construction projects. We've got all of our field staff using PPE, personal protective equipment, to perform these duties. We've made some changes to our software system, which allows for inspection results to be sent directly to a permit holder. And then we're using pilot programs to help us with virtual inspections for some types of residential trade permits, kind of your standard run-of-the-mill inspection processes. For trade permits, we can assist somebody in a new water heater installation without necessarily having to come into direct contact with them. So we're employing that. Finally, our boards and commissions, which entertain many of the applications that eventually result in construction permits, those boards and commissions continue to meet. Our Development Review Board, who handles subdivisions, have had 3 very successful virtual hearings. And our Environmental Planning Commission, the EPC, which entertains zone change requests and some site plan review, they had a meeting last week, and that went well. So we continue to do the business of the public and involve the public in that business. If anyone needs more information on that, they can certainly go to the Planning Department landing page, cabq.gov/planning, for additional information.
This is Lawrence Rael. I'm the Chief Operations Officer for the city, and as Brennan just described, the Planning Department is a key, if you will, to opening up the construction programs throughout the city. The private sector is doing a lot of investment as we speak. I mean, just simply putting in telecommunication lines throughout the city to upgrade our telecommunication systems, which obviously help make calls like this even better in the future. And so that's you'll see a lot of that construction along our city streets. But on the public side, we have major construction going on several roads in the downtown core. Rio Grande Boulevard, for example, you will see a lot of traffic issues associated with that project. 4th Street will get a overlay, if you will, of asphalt here in the next couple of weeks. And then the area around Manal and 12th will get some work. But also just major capital projects like 2 community centers, one on the east side up by Singh and another one on the west side by Westgate, will also get basically a new community centers. And then a huge library up on Central by where the old Caravan East facility used to be. A lot of construction really drives our community and helps us, as the mayor said earlier, put food and on the table for a lot of our construction workers throughout the city. And ironically, what you see really is that you see a lot of opportunity for us to do the infrastructure upgrades in the corridors where we normally experience a lot of traffic. Even to the extent that we've been doing a lot of safety improvements along Central to accommodate for the art project that needed a lot of work as it relates to safety measures. So the construction program will continue to go forward. $70 million worth of funds allocated through a process that really the mayor helped, basically directed us to expedite getting out permits and contracts, awarding contracts to firms to move forward. So we'll continue to do that work through the summer and obviously into the fall, and it's give us an opportunity to really continue to stimulate the economy for the city.
Great, thank you very much, Mr. Rayl. Next up, we're going to go to Bobby. And Bobby has a question about our mass transit systems. Bobby, go right ahead. You're on the line.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor, for doing what you do every day, and to the first responders and healthcare workers. And my question to you, Mr. Mayor, is when do you see mass transit opening back up in the foreseeable future?
Thanks, Bobby. Thinking about those big turquoise art buses and wondering if we're ever going to see them again. I'll tell you what, we are going to phase in transit probably in step with opening up. So the way we're looking at this is, of course, as a reminder for folks, transit is running now. It's running on what we call a Saturday schedule, which is about 20%. And then we added some extra buses on Central because Central is still getting quite heavily used. So that seems to have been, okay for the time being. We did also open up a North Valley route, the one that goes kind of through Rio Grande and north, I think yesterday, actually. So what we're going to do is with each phase of opening up, we'll have an accompanying phase of transit. And so right now we're not sure which phase, like the art project, for example, would go in. But in the meantime, we did add a lot of safety measures on the art corridor. So again, taking advantage of no one being on the streets and the bus not running, there's now curbs to prevent people from cutting in front of the art buses. So again, we're building for that, and I think, stay tuned. But transit will start opening up in step with the businesses.
Great. Thank you very much, Mayor. And we're going to try to get to as many questions as we can here. We got about 5 more minutes. Next up, we're going to go to Mildred, who has a question about how the city and the state are working together, how the mayor and the governor are working together. Mildred, you can go right ahead. You're live on the line.
Great. Thank you very much. We've all seen the TV stories about how the mayor of Grants is defying the governor's stay-at-home order and trying to open up his city. Will you, as mayor of the largest city in New Mexico, be able to have a say in which businesses open first and when? And how much guidance will you take from the governor's office on this? And how much can you push back on that guidance if needed?
Thanks, Mildred. Appreciate that question. And, for us, there's a couple of things around this. Number one, as much as I wish that I was totally able to do whatever I want as your mayor. The governor does trump any mayor, so that might be an interesting choice of words. But the point is, I think what everyone understands that, it does not make sense for a city like Albuquerque to be not aligned with the governor. So to your point, though, I talk to the governor regularly, and both with other mayors. The mayors of New Mexico have a call every week, and now the Central New Mexico mayors, I'm convening them every week as well. And in Central New Mexico, we're trying to move together as best that we can. And so we're going to work on that. That's the game plan. And the governor's been very receptive to all of our input from Albuquerque. So I am going to try and, again, advocate for what's best for Albuquerque and for the freedom to be able to do that as a city if we need to. So very ready to advocate strongly, and I think also just have a good working relationship. So, for example, the fact that our parks are open, that was an advocacy point that we held in Albuquerque to keep our parks open. Same with our open space and even our planning department and even construction. These were all things that I personally advocated for, and we were able to work out with our partners at the state. So that's a very good thing. So I think we're in a good place as we look towards opening up, and I'm optimistic that we're going to be given the kind of leeway that we need to do that. And, I would just close that, as Albuquerque, as I've mentioned before, we get everyone's, whether it's folks coming into the mall or the airport or to use our hospitals. And so that's why I do think we should be thoughtful. Anyone going rogue right now just ends up in Albuquerque's healthcare system. So I think it's just dangerous for anyone to go out on their own right now. But the good news is I think we're working together both in Central New Mexico and at least Albuquerque and Santa Fe. So for the time being, I think we're in good shape.
Great. Thank you, Mayor. And we've got time for one more question here. Our last question comes from David. And David has a question about some signage around small businesses and social distancing. Go right ahead, David.
Yes. Hi, Mayor. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Yes. My question would be, will the health department be following up on social distancing? As you walk in, I noticed that there were protests, people demanding that the stores be open, and my question would be, is there a possibility that the health department would actually post up notices that these stores open too early? That way I know before I enter the store that they're not following the proper protocols, like social distancing or keeping the limit in the building. And that's my question.
Okay, thank you, David. David, that's a very interesting question, and it's because we are literally looking at this week. So there's a couple of ways we might do this. One is our city has a business registration process, and so we can always revoke that registration, for example, if somebody's not following the guidance that we're providing from our health department. And we also have some other tools, even with respect to things like code and so forth, that we can use. So I think the city has adequate tools, and the other side of that equation is informing the public. And you raise a really interesting idea. I'm learning a lot right now from Georgia and Colorado, and I think in many ways it's good. You want to move fast, but you don't necessarily want to be first out of the gate in this situation because we can learn from others. And Colorado seems to be coming up with this type of certification system where businesses are certified to kind of go to the next phase of opening. I don't know if we're going to do that, but it's something I'm very interested in. We may even use something a little simpler, like a red, yellow, green type stickering system or something to that effect. It could also be like our food report. We use the red and green report for restaurant food quality. So we are working on different mechanisms to alert the public as to businesses' compliance. And so I would just say stay tuned, give us a week or two, and I think we'll have a good answer to your question.
Great.
Okay,
Thank
so
you, Mayor.
Go ahead.
Yes, I was going to say we've reached the end of our questions, and to go finish with some closing remarks, please.
Thanks so much. Well, I appreciate everyone who joined on the call today, and again, appreciate folks weathering some technical difficulties, but I'm glad we got this up and running, and actually I think had a very good discussion. So, first I want to thank everyone for staying home. If you can, that is what is making reopening possible. That's what's making recovery possible. I also want to thank folks who can't stay at home because they're either, first responders, public health workers, grocers, et cetera. So for those folks also who are essential, thank you for doing what you're doing. And, I want to mention that I think May, at least I hope and believe, is going to be a month of optimism and of reopening for us. I think that's a good thing. But I also know it's going to be a bit of a grind. There's no quick fix here. Nowhere in the country is there a solid answer on pretty much any question. But we will continue to make informed decisions and make decisions. So we are not going to stand by. We're going to make decisions and move forward in an informed way. And so I think for folks, I would just say that we have done a great job. Bernalillo County especially, most big cities in states have worse rates with respect to coronavirus and all these other kinds of things. And in New Mexico, I'm proud to say it's the reverse. Bernalillo County is doing great. We are one of the leaders in the state on this, but we still have a little ways to go. And so we just got to keep it up for another week or two, and then we're going to be able to bear the fruit of that investment that we've made in our community. So we're a resilient city. We're going to get through this together as one Albuquerque, and we're going to be stronger for it this summer. So with that, I appreciate it and wish everyone the very best health and safety over the next coming weeks. Thanks so much.
Great. Thank you, Mayor, and thank you to all of our City of Albuquerque officials who've joined us today to provide this key information for everyone. And thank you to everyone for participating in today's town hall on reopening Albuquerque. You can visit www.cabq.gov for the latest information, or please call 311. If you'd like to leave a message for the mayor or we didn't get to your question, please remain on the line and you can leave a voicemail in just a moment. This concludes the telephone town hall. Thank you.